trades are starting to go down and more are coming with that roster deadline right around the corner. Here are some scenarios that make so much sense they just might happen. The Commanders are shopping Brian Robinson Jr. They're starting running back from last year. They feel like they have good options with Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt and Austin Eckler, of course, so they could afford to move on from Brian Robinson. The Bears make the most sense to me. I bet a lot of people out there watching feel the same way for several reasons. The Bears, looking at their roster, they could benefit from adding someone to Ben Johnson's offense. And, they've been looking a little bit. They tried out Jamal Williams, so they might be looking for a more physical back like a Brian Robinson Jr. And there's a connection there. Eric Bieniemy was the offensive coordinator of the Commanders 2 years ago when Robinson kind of really started to take off a little bit. And he is now the running back coach of the Chicago Bears. So that's a little bonus there as well on top of them possibly needing a running back. And there isn't a long list of teams that are going to be desperate for a running back right now. Remember the Broncos added J.K. Dobbins, the Texans added Nick Chubb. If Mixon's going to be out longer than expected, then maybe the Texans look to add Brian Robinson. Some people mention the Cowboys. They got a number of guys they like, but they could add someone. The Bears, just for the reasons we explained, make the most sense. And the Commanders are kind of looking to get rid of him right now, so he could go for a little cheaper than what you think his skill level is at, and he's on an expiring deal. So a 5th-round pick could make sense. Could it be a swap deal? Could it be a 6th? That'd be a pretty damn good deal for Chicago. But it's all definitely possible. But one to watch here as we near that roster deadline. There's a little bit of buzz about the Patriots potentially looking around to see what they can get for their former surprise first-round pick, Cole Strange, who can play guard or center. It's a new staff in there. They drafted a center from Georgia, Jared Wilson. He's actually ahead of Strange on the depth chart, or could be at guard or center, and they have Garrett Bradbury, who's likely going to start at center. So multiple guys the new staff may like better than Strange, and there's definitely teams that could benefit from adding him out here. So an interesting name to watch. I thought of a few teams. The Eagles popped in my mind as a good one as well. Landon Dickerson a little beat up. The Eagles very much value the offensive line. They do have some backups that could step in, but Dickerson's supposed to be good to go week 1. Still a team to watch. What about the Texans as well? But the Niners really, really stand out if they view Strange as a fit, because they could use an upgrade at left guard where Strange could plug and play and start for them, and they're pretty good at developing offensive line and making them look better, play better, especially in the run game, than how they look on paper, for an example. But he also could fill in at center. He wouldn't start there, I wouldn't think, but they could use a potential upgrade for the future, or he could fill in there. So I think it would help the 49ers out multiple ways, potentially. Again, the Eagles made a lot of sense. I think the Patriots would probably keep him for a 7. If he got offered a 7th-round pick, it could be a swap of picks, 6 and a 7, but there's really no firm word of the Patriots are trading Cole Strange. It's just logic based on the depth chart and what's going on in training camp preseason says that they may be willing to, but I just don't get the sense they'll completely cut him or just completely give him away, but we'll see. 49ers, I feel like, would benefit the most from adding a guy like Cole Strange. Another Patriots player that is on the roster bubble, Anthony Jennings, who's been he has been super productive, but a decent underrated player for them off the edge in New England. And we're going to talk about the Patriots a bit in this video as well. But Jennings is a guy that actually could just be outright cut. It's definitely a possibility. There might not be teams desperate enough to trade for him, but it could be something with a swap of late round picks like this. The best fit out there is also a team that I think could add an edge rusher, maybe not to start, but to rotate, and it is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So if the Patriots very well could cut him, like I said, I'd watch out for Tampa, maybe Tennessee, Philadelphia, maybe, if he's cut, but Tampa could be that landing spot either way, but a swap of late round picks would make some sense. The Patriots, Eagles, these are teams that could be very active as we approach the roster deadline, and we're not done talking about them. Somewhat of a notable name here, defensive tackle of the Buffalo Bills, Daquan Jones, who has had some really solid years. Last year, a little underwhelming for Buffalo, and the Bills brought in multiple options, young options, in the interior defensive line. So can they afford to keep all those guys? They could afford to shed some space on top of it. So they could look to move Daquan Jones, and there's multiple teams I like here. I know the Raiders are sniffing around for an interior player since they lost Christian Wilkins. Are they in the market for a long-time vet, like an older guy like this? that's the question. The Baltimore Ravens made a lot of sense. They remember Michael Pierce retired. They could be looking to add someone else. They do have some young options in terms of depth. Would the Bills trade to the Baltimore Ravens? A big-time threat in the AFC. They played them week 1. That's the question. The Philadelphia Eagles made a trade that was actually yesterday for John Mechie, a receiver, and there was reports saying that the Eagles are not done. They're still looking. It's not really a surprise. They're always looking to make moves here. And remember, they lost Milton Williams, a different type of interior defensive lineman, but there's a little, it just feels like they're a tiny bit thinner on options overall because of that. So they could use Daquan Jones to rotate in there with Jordan Davis. Makes a lot of sense. So a pretty solid player would make an impact for a contender. So the Bills could, if they're willing to trade him, they could demand a little bit more. I don't know if a team would trade a 5th round pick at this stage of the offseason where we're at. Teams aren't dying to trade valuable picks at this point. A 6th round pick could make some sense. Could the Eagles steal him for a little bit less than that? A swap of picks, it's definitely a possibility, but a big man to watch in the interior front. Another potential Eagle to watch for in the trade market is Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who they just traded for in that Kenny Pickett trade this offseason. So they actually gained a 5th round pick in that trade, and now they can flip them and help themselves a little bit more. He looks better than McCord right now. Obviously, Tanner McKee is clearly the second-string quarterback, a fantastic one, it looks like. But do they just want to dump McCord? I mean, if they feel like he's not good enough already, the Eagles know their stuff, so they could move on from him. But I bet you they want to try to develop him, and they're not going to keep 4 quarterbacks, I would assume. So they could look to move Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Now, there's a few teams out there that haven't had the best injury luck or just could use another quarterback. I look at the New York Jets for multiple reasons this makes sense because, I mean, Justin Fields got banged up right away in practice. He's fine now, but Tyrod Taylor's banged up now. You need another quarterback in there. You don't need a starter. You need a backup, and you got one that kind of fits DTR's play style, kind of fits Justin Fields and Tyrod Taylor in a way because of his athleticism, his mobility. You know, he's not quite as good of a runner as those guys, but it just feels like in a young player they could develop. It just feels like a type of player Aaron Glenn would like to fit behind Justin Fields in that offense. So it makes sense. The Eagles could cut DTR. I would think they would be able to get a little something out of him, for him right now. So the Jets and the Eagles swapping late round picks made some sense. Giants tight end Daniel Bellinger is a guy that it feels like is moving down the depth chart right now and can become a roster bubble candidate, a cut candidate, trade candidate. Maybe they keep him, but the Giants have a number of young tight ends. They're not going to be able to keep them all. They drafted Fedone. Dulcich is a guy that's moving, it feels like is moving up the depth chart, maybe in that second spot, hopping Bellinger, so he could be available. There's also an unnamed injury heading into that week 2 of preseason for Bellinger, so that was interesting. It's kind of, I feel like it's obvious that he could be a roster bubble type player right now, so he could be available, whether he ends up being a free agent or by trade. Now, I use the Chargers here, and the Chargers are definitely not desperate for a tight end. I haven't heard anything about them. They're out there looking for a tight end. Not the case right now. I kind of went with just the best pure fit. Team like the Miami Dolphins, watch out for them. They're much more desperate, at least they should be, for a tight end. I know the Saints were sniffing around a little bit. I'd watch teams like that. There could be others, but with a smaller player trade like this that may be available by trade or by cut via free agency then, or waivers, I should say, I like the fits, and the Chargers with that coaching staff and their system, it makes sense, and it'd be a good addition. They can get a lot more out of him because he looked pretty promising his first year. A tough physical tight end if healthy, but I know they have Disley. They added Tyler Conklin. I do like that addition. They drafted Gadsden, which different type of tight end, more of a move tight end, almost feels like a receiver. So I could see it, and it'd be a swap of late round picks. And again, the Giants could keep him. They could cut him. It's definitely a strong possibility. So a smaller name to watch. Here's another smaller player trade before we get into the Trey Hendrickson stuff. But Joshua Williams, defensive back from the Chiefs, moving a little bit down the depth chart. And the Chiefs are always moving out in trades, defensive backs, recouping new ones, developing them. And Williams is a guy that had a lot of upside, still probably does just because of his length, but you feel like he's a guy that can not only just play outside corner, but he's played in the box, the nickel spot a little bit, but has the measurables to play safety as well, and that could appeal to a team like the Miami Dolphins. But a guy the Chiefs could look to move right now for a late pick. Does he end up getting cut? That's definitely a possibility as well. But Miami is very much desperate for a corner, and again, I think because he has the chance to be very versatile, that could really appeal to Miami. It just feels like an Anthony Weaver type of defensive back, in that defense as well. And I mean, they tried to sign some guys like a Rasul Douglas. He's kind of turned them down. So they may look to trade for a guy like this. It feels like they want to keep it a young cornerback group at least. And they're always getting injured back there, too. I mean, every year, Miami's getting beat up in the secondary, but specifically the cornerback position. So they may not want a super expensive guy, so they may turn to a trade like this. It'd be a swap of late-round picks. It's totally one that I could see. But I'd watch for Miami. I mean, they could still sign a corner. They could trade for a bigger name. It's all of the above is definitely possible for Miami, who should be pretty desperate for a corner. And we're going to talk about a couple scenarios for Trey Hendrickson here, and there's a lot of teams that stand out, but the Bengals came out yesterday and said they're more open to shopping, trading Trey Hendrickson. They're listening to offers right now, and they want a first-round pick and a defensive player. It's a little much, but they might be a little more willing to come down on that. The season's about to start. Everyone's trying to kick into gear here. And remember, the Seahawks and DK, they demanded a first-round pick. Not even 24 hours later, they traded him for a second to the Steelers. So maybe something like that happens here. Who knows? We have the Colts. There's another team we'll talk about, another scenario, but I've mentioned there's a lot of teams here. I mentioned the Commanders in the past. Mentioned the Chargers, maybe a little less likely. The Panthers, the Buccaneers, the Lions, the Packers, a number of teams that could be interested. But the Colts really stand out for multiple reasons. I mean, they were interested early in the offseason when the Bengals weren't as serious about trading them. So, of course, they got to be calling right now. Lou Anarumo was the defensive coordinator of the Bengals for Trey Hendrickson for so long. He's the defensive coordinator of the Colts right now. We know it's a perfect fit. They're not desperate for a pass rusher, but there's some guys on an expiring deal, of course. So, and they're always looking to get better, I would imagine, Chris Ballard and that front office. So, Hendrickson paired with Latu for the future and Tui Maloau, that would make a lot of sense here, and they could actually include someone like Kwity Paye or Samson Ebukam in a trade and help the Bengals out by getting a pass rusher back, but getting a younger guy if it's Paye here in return. But maybe the Colts, maybe they feel Paye's off limits. He's got an expiring deal. Hendrickson's a major upgrade. I feel like they'd be open to doing that. Maybe they could include another corner or a corner in this possibly. I think more likely a pass rusher, but again, the Bengals are looking for a first and a player. I don't think that makes a lot of sense for especially a team like the Colts to do. You know, they can't trade a first-round pick. They might be looking for a quarterback in the future, so they need that pick. And you got to trade a first-round pick, a good player like Kwity Paye, even though he's been a little underwhelming. And you got to reach an agreement with Trey Hendrickson on a long-term deal. It's a little tricky to have all that happen right now. So at first I came up with a second-round pick in Kwity Paye. And, I mean, the problem on the Bengals end is you're trading a star pass rusher, and then you're getting a decent young pass rusher, but he's on an expiring deal too. So maybe that's, if you're not getting a first-round pick, which I don't think they are in this scenario specifically, then you might need something else. Second, fifth, Kwity Paye. Maybe the Bengals wouldn't even do that. Maybe they just rather have him sit until he agrees on a deal. I feel like the Colts would do that. Maybe the Colts say, hey, we don't want to give up 2 picks with Kwity Paye. It's definitely a possibility as well. But for several reasons, they made some sense here when it comes to Trey Hendrickson, mainly because that fit. And I threw a Patriots scenario together for, several reasons here. But again, there could be other teams. The Seahawks are a team that could include a player, one of their young pass rushers as well. But we mentioned the Commanders, Lions, Packers, Buccaneers I like a lot as well. So there actually might be teams I think are more likely than the Patriots. But the Patriots are a hot topic right now because their GM came out and said, we're open for business. We would like to acquire possibly if it's a good fit and good player, and we'll be willing to trade a first-round pick or a second-round pick. So it's kind of sparking some talk about the Patriots possibly trying to trade for, Parsons probably is off limits, or Terry McLaurin or Trey Hendrickson. A day after the Hendrickson talk, it's interesting for them to come out and say that. So they're open for business, I think, both ways, acquiring big players, trading players away, and the Bengals could be looking to trade Hendrickson now. We heard that. And Kyle Duggar was kind of talked about last week that he could be on the block because he's playing with the second string right now. And I identified the Bengals as the best fit, actually. So this is a little bit more out there in terms of a trade scenario because a lot has to happen. There's a lot going on here. But to me, this makes a lot of sense. My favorite fit for Duggar is the Bengals. They may not be interested in him because he's kind of got a bigger contract. The Patriots, it would actually be a benefit for them to trade out Duggar because he's a second string guy right now. They want to get rid of that contract. If they're bringing Hendrickson in, they got to dish out a big contract. So getting rid of Kyle Duggar would actually be huge for them. That would actually, getting Hendrickson and trading Duggar would actually be very, very valuable to the New England Patriots here. So because they do have a lot of cap space right now, and they could use that now or to roll over, but they're actually in the red for next year. I'm not really worried about that. but a bonus moving on from Duggar, a guy they may want to move on from. The Bengals have to want him. They have to want his contract. They could move on from him after this year, and they could be free of that. But a little expensive, just around $11 million, just under $11 million for this year. But I think that's a really good fit in Al Golden's defense. Having a safety that can play in the box, that could blitz a little bit, makes some sense. So if the Bengals demand a first-round pick, this is one that could somehow work out. And this might be a pretty good first-round pick. So the Patriots may not want to trade a first-round pick for Trey Hendrickson, but it sounds like they may be open to that. But a first and Kyle Duggar, and the Patriots actually get back a third-round pick, because I just think it's crazy if a team just trades a first and a player and not really get anything back other than Trey Hendrickson, because he's 30 years old, still playing great, obviously, needs a new contract. You have to work on that. You have to pay him more this year and in the future, because he's kind of getting lowball or underpaid, I'd say, in the contract that he's on for this year, the deal he's on for this year as well. So a lot has to happen here. So I just don't see them getting a first-round pick and a player, and that's it. You call it a day. So I thought, if a first-round pick is involved, this is probably what made the most sense. Would a contending team be willing to do it? A team like the Lions and the Packers, they're very thin on future cap space. So it'd be a little tricky for them to risk that, give him a new deal, and give him a first-round pick. But hey, who knows? I like the Buccaneers a lot. They're a team that could upgrade here. Good team, could contend, especially with Hendrickson. So the Buccaneers could be another team to watch as well. We mentioned the Commanders in the past. They're dealing with Terry McLaurin right now, so we'll see what happens there. I've seen people mention other teams as well, but it doesn't work financially. Some teams feel like they're set. So I know Panthers have been mentioned. They could make some sense, but we'll see. So here's some scenarios that definitely made some sense, and trades are starting to pick up. We'll see a lot of those smaller trades, but a lot more and more are going to happen, especially over the next week or so as we approach the NFL season. So let me know your guys' thoughts, your scenarios in the comments. Update live news on our Twitter, so make sure you follow that. Link pinned in the comments, but that's going to do it. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.